Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the AAS YouTube channel. And this is part of the good stuff. This is the AAS Journal Author Series. And I'm super happy to have Sarbit Hakkari with us today. I did that. It's actually much easier than it looks like in the spelling. So Sarbit Hakkari.
It's an incredibly small fraction of people that get it.
Yeah. Very cool. Sumit, where are you at? Where's your geolocation?
So I'm at East Lansing, currently at home because of social distancing, but I am a postdoc at Michigan State University.
I had visited MSU once or twice in my life. I liked it. Very nice.
It's very beautiful here.
We are on June 28th here, 2021, as we shoot this. And how is the summer in East Lansing? Is it summer yet in East Lansing? I should ask.
Yeah, that's a good question. It took a while for it to be summer, and but it is now finally summer. It's actually raining for the last 1 week, and also humid. So yeah, that's it. But you know, it beats the 9 months of winter.
There we go. But the trees are green, right?
Trees are green. The ducks are quacking. Birds are everywhere. Yeah.
It is the warmer months, and
once it's past 5 p.m. it's very beautiful.
Yeah. Okay. And the humidity will clear out at some point, so it'll
hopefully, yeah.
Sumit, what do you like to do for research?
So I am mainly interested in supernova and the progenitors of supernova and the effects of supernova on the interstellar medium.
Okay.
So for my PhD, I was studying supernova remnants, which is basically a way to, I mean, the motivation for that was to actually understand the progenitors of supernovae. And we wanted to use this technique that I'm going to talk about in the paper called delay time distribution to actually figure out like what are the ages and masses of stars that produce all of the supernova remnants in our local group galaxies. And to do that, you need to kind of model supernova remnants a little bit. So that was part of my PhD, to actually like come up with a population empirical phenomenological model of supernova remnants. Nice. And then I kind of took that and applied those models to supernova 1885 and another paper. I have a paper in the press on the momentum from supernovae, from supernova remnants that goes into the ISM. But then this paper that I'll talk about is kind of in a tangential direction, which kind of focuses on this delay time distribution technique, which is kind of a generalized technique that you can apply to study the progenitors of anything, not just supernova.
Okay.
Yeah, and also at Michigan State, I also, with Laura Chomiak, my advisor, I studied transients. So basically anything that pops, you know, on and off in radio. And we did a survey called Chiles Verdes, which is basically a 1,000-hour radio survey for 6 years, looking for anything that goes blip. And that was a very intimidating project. So, yeah, that's kind of the summary of what I like.
Cool. And that is going to bring us to this very lovely article on a relatively unique application of this. The R.R. Lyrae delay time distribution, a novel perspective on models of old stellar populations. And Sumit, take us away.
So yeah, so as I mentioned, that this delay time distribution technique is something that we used to study supernovae initially. And we decided in this paper to apply it to R. Lyrae. So that might sound like, you know, like as if we're in two completely different planes. You know, on one hand you have supernova, on the other hand you have R. Lyrae. So just a little bit of backstory. So this delay time distribution is basically defined as the rate of something. So the formation rate of, you know, I was talking about supernova, so you can think of the formation rate of supernova, in this case, the formation rate of R. Lyrae, versus time elapsed since a brief burst of star formation. That's the textbook definition. And so the idea is that, you know, suppose you have, let's say, a very simple unit of stellar population, like a star cluster.
Mhm.
And that star cluster, let's say, forms instantly. You know, you click your finger, you have a star cluster. That cluster is going to produce, let's say, supernovae or R Lyrae over some period of time. Okay, and you know, if let's say, let's think of supernovae for now. So, for example, if it's core collapse supernovae, you're going to get a lot of supernova very early on. You know, within like a few tens of millions of years. And then as you go on to like hundreds, 200 million year giga years, it's going to drop to zero. You know, if it's a type 1a supernova, it's going to be initially kind of zero, but then it's going to go up. And, you know, and it's going to, as we have find out, it kind of slowly trails off to zero at very, very old ages. And so this information contains everything you need to know about the progenitor population of whatever it is you're studying. So it was initially applied, sort of designed and applied to study the type 1a progenitor problem, which is, do type 1as come from two different populations, you know, accreting white dwarfs or merging white dwarfs, or some other kind of channel. Right. And what the measurements, it's the way the measurements was done was that you take a survey of supernova and you compare that with the star formation histories of the background galaxies, okay, or the stellar populations that produce the supernova. And basically, when you solve for the DTD like you're solving for X, okay, so the star formation history convolved with the DTD gives you the supernova rate or the rate of something. And so you know the supernova rate from the survey, you know the star formation history from, you know, spectra or photometry, and so you solve for the DTD.
Okay.
And with type 1as, it showed that it, like, initially type 1as are produced at a very high rate on timescales of a few 100 million years. And it has this very, very long tail that goes all the way out to like 10 giga years or so. And it's very powerful, this measurement, because you can compare that with population synthesis models, which is basically you making you know, populations of a certain type of star on your computer. You know, you throw your stellar evolution physics, binary evolution physics, and you get a population of, let's say, supernova. And so you can directly compare, you know, the DTD you get from population synthesis models with these observations and constrain the progenitors for an entire class of object or for an entire population of objects. And so for type 1as, it showed, for example, that that accreting white dwarfs cannot produce supernovae on 10 gigayear timescales, but merging white dwarfs, depending on how far they're separated, can produce supernovae on relatively long timescales. And so that put a very powerful constraint on this two progenitor problem, which is, you know, one of the oldest and longest problems in astrophysics. So from there, at the time, my advisor, Carlos Bodenas, who was a co-author here, and Dan Maus and his collaborators at the time figured that, you know what, we have all these star formation history measurements in the local group. Okay, so in the Magellanic Clouds, in M31, in some of the dwarf galaxies, and these measurements are made from resolved stellar populations. You know, you take the individual stars, put them on a color magnitude diagram, and fit stellar evolution models through them, and you can get a star formation history of each and every region of the galaxy. Right. And so that avoids the problem of doing DTDs, this delay time distribution, with distant galaxies, because you're relying on spectra. The resolution is much smaller, spatial resolution, so you're averaging over large areas. And so the star formation history overall is not, you know, reliable. We don't know how much reliable, but it's not reliable just because of, you know, this fundamental reason, or at least you cannot like accurately calculate a DTD. There could be unknown systematics there, but in the local group, you don't necessarily have this problem. And so Carlos and Dan wrote a paper in 2010 measuring a DTD with supernova remnants, which are basically treated as a supernova in this case. And they found that it's actually kind of consistent with DTDs you measure in surveys, in supernova surveys, with a slight difference on at the 100 million year age range, and that'll be for another maybe AppJ talk. But what they realized is that this is actually a technique that you can apply not just to supernova or supernova remnants, but to basically any type of star. Okay, like, stellar evolution is just a general problem. The supernova progenitor problem is essentially a stellar evolution problem. We don't understand how, white dwarfs or progenitors of white dwarfs evolve. And that problem, that same symptom affects many other types of stars. In 2015, Carlos wrote a paper on planetary nebula, which is basically, the endpoints of less than 8 solar mass stars, in some cases binaries. And there are, and the delay time distribution there, which was basically taking the star formation history of the Large Magellanic Cloud, putting a planetary nebula catalog on that, and then calculating the DTD. And that showed that there are two different populations of planetary nebula. There's one that is produced on very long gigayear timescales, and then there's one that's produced on slightly shorter 100 million year or 800 million year timescales. And so that was very interesting because you're taking this entire population, this entire survey of objects, and doing stellar evolution study with that, and this DTD is like, it's perfect for this because all you need is a survey and the star formation history measurements, which already exist. And so from there, during my PhD, we, Carlos and I kind of decided that, hey, let's apply this to other types of stars, see what we find, see what we understand.
Indeed.
And so that, go ahead.
Indeed, yes.
Yeah. And so that brought us to this paper, the R-Lyrae delay time distribution. One of the reasons we picked this is because in the LMC, there is this OGLE survey, the optical gravitational lensing experiment, which found nearly 30,000 R-Lyrae, at least in our star formation history survey area. So if you go to figure 1, you're going to see the survey.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah. So yeah, there you go. So yeah, that is nearly 30,000 R-Lyrae in this star formation history measurement area by Harris and Zaritsky 2009. So they basically used stellar population data taken, I believe, with the 1 meter slope telescope. And measured the star formation history down to like 5 or 6 gigayears. And so the great thing here is that it allows us to actually test this delay time distribution in a very rigorous way, because you have a lot of objects, and the more objects you have, the more signal to noise you have. And so you can test for, little systematics here, maybe some statistical techniques here and there, and also maybe try to see if you learn something about R-Lyrae. I mean, most of the constraints on R-Lyrae kind of come from star cluster measurements, okay? But there's only a few, like there's a handful of star clusters that host a significant amount of R-Lyrae, whereas knowing the same age and mass constraints for the entire population of R-Lyrae in a galaxy is not necessarily as possible. And so the delay time distribution is like the first way to really rigorously test that with this information on star formation history and OGLE survey that we have in hand.
Yep.
So yeah, that's how, so we proceeded to measure this DTD. And the result is shown in figure 2, I guess.
Okay, let's go ahead and blow those up. There we go. Even bigger.
Figure 3. Yeah.
Figure 3. That's
Yeah.
the moonshot. Ooh, okay, a lot going on in this one. Okay.
There's a lot. Yeah. So this is the delay time distribution of R-Lyrae. So on the y-axis, I am showing the number of R-Lyrae produced per stellar mass in the LMC. And on the x-axis is the delay time. So remember I said delay time is, imagine the stellar mass that is producing R-Lyrae formed instantly, and so the time elapsed since that moment of creation is the delay time. And so essentially it's the age of the R-Lyrae. You can directly interpret it in that sense. And so what we find is, so before that, there are a couple of different vibration modes or pulsational modes of R-Lyrae. RRAB, the one in purple, is the fundamental mode. Okay. RRC is the first overtone. Mm-hmm. And these two usually constitute the largest fraction of the R-Lyrae in the galaxy,
Mhm.
or in a general population of RLRA. So I just separated them by color. But overall, what you can see is that the delay time distribution is essentially zero from for less than 1 gig a year. Okay, I kind of wrote this in mega years because that's kind of how the code spit out the information. But
So
less
good.
than a gig a year, there's nothing. And then after that, you see a lot of signals. So you get RLRA on timescales of 1 gig a year or longer. And this corresponds to progenitor masses of less than 2 solar mass.
Mhm.
And a little bit of difference if you just vary the metallicity.
Right.
Okay, so this when we first saw this, we were like, wait a minute, this is kind of interesting because RLRA are almost universally recognized as ancient stars, so older, typically older than 10 gigayears, and these are based on observations of globular clusters in the Milky Way, in the LMC, in the SMC, which host very large populations of RLRA. And you can also independently measure the ages of globular clusters, from their color magnitude diagrams. And so essentially only globular clusters older and metal poor usually has RLRA, and younger clusters don't. If you also look at the halo of our galaxy, the halo contains a lot of RLRA. The halo of the LMC, SMC also has RLRA, and generally these are very old populations. So it's almost, based on this, there was a lot of consensus that RLRA are ancient stars, but with this DTD, which is the first time we're measuring it for an entire galaxy, an entire population of a galaxy, we're finding that RLRA can, in fact, be produced by stars younger than 10 gigayears.
Mhm.
And so initially we were we thought that, we discovered something. But on the other hand, there's all this very strong constraints on the ages of RLRA from all these other avenues. And our referee even pointed out some very good points that, if you look at the chemical evolution history of the Magellanic Clouds, it's not really consistent with RLRA being produced this young, because by the time you're 1 or 2 gigayears into the LMC, you're kind of going into this metal-rich population of stars. And it's very difficult. I mean, it would be extremely surprising to get so many RLRA on these age and metallicity ranges in the LMC, whereas you don't see it anywhere else.
Okay.
And so that so that made us kind of perplexed for a while. What's going on? And so we realized that there's 3 things that could be going on. Okay, one is that the equation that we're solving here is very simple. You have the star formation history convolved with the DTD to give you the number of RLRA as a function of position in the galaxy. So either something's wrong with the RLRA survey, maybe something's wrong with our technique of measuring a DTD, or maybe something's wrong with the star formation history. So we looked at this in sequence. Okay, so figure 2 shows the RLRA completeness. Okay, so what if the RLRA survey by Ogle is not complete? Maybe there's a lot of contaminating sources in there. Maybe there's some young variable stars that look like RLRA and so on. And this is in principle unlikely, because RLRA they produce very distinct light curves. And Ogle is a very high cadence survey, and it was able to sample these light curves very well. But if you sample light curves of RLRA, it's very difficult to confuse them with other types of variable stars, especially the fundamental RAV pulsators, which are the majority of RLRA. And also these are horizontal branch stars, right? So they are much brighter than the old main sequence that they came from. And this is what I'm showing here. That if you look at the completeness curve, okay, so this is on the y-axis is the fraction of the population, and on the x-axis is the magnitude, the I-band magnitudes.
Yeah.
So by the time you get to 19.5 or even 19.7, you've already accounted for almost 100% of the sample, and the completeness limit of the I-band is much fainter. So we're not missing objects, and based on statistics of light curves were definitely not contaminated by other sources. So the RLRA survey should be clean. That is almost certain. So then the other possibility is that maybe the delay time distribution, the way we're measuring the DTD is, off. Something's probably wrong with that. So we tried to look at that. So that is going to be the next set of plots. If you go to figure, I have to try to remind myself. Maybe it's figure 4.
Yeah, I understand this. Figure 4.
Okay, so figure 4 is not what I wanted, but I'll just briefly comment here. So, so in figure 4, one thing that we wanted to also check is that the star formation history of the LMC is solved for different metallicity bins. Okay, so you have Z of less than or Z of 0.001, Z of 0.0025, and then Z of 0.005 and then 0.008. And so what we tried to see was that, okay, there is this concern that RLRA DTD could be kind of contaminated by metal-rich star formation history. Maybe that's kind of getting folded in. So what if we just took the metal-poor star formation history and tried to solve the DTD? Would that help? And the answer is in figure 4b, which is the gray curve. So that's the DTD from the metal poor star formation history. Okay. And yes, so some of the 1 gig year, 2 gig year signal, which is the red dashed line, that is probably coming from a slightly metal rich population. But then you still have a lot of this spillover all the way out to 2 gig years, which is less than 10 gig years. So yes, that doesn't necessarily solve the problem. So then I thought that, okay, well, let's see, maybe we're making a mistake with the measurement of the DTD. So the way we did this is with this in section 4.1, I say mock DTD test. So that's what I do in figure 5. Okay, so figure 5 is good enough for display right now. So what we do is we said that, okay, let's say that the LMC RLRA are all 10 gig year stars. Okay. So to see if our algorithm, so the way we solve DTD is we use an MCMC Markov chain Monte Carlo to solve for the posteriors in each age bin. Okay. And with MCMC, it can always happen that your solver gets stuck on an island of probability somewhere random, and then you're just kind of measuring that island and not the actual one. So there's issues like that. So what we did was we said that, okay, let's make a fake RLRA map. Okay, let's assume that this RLRA is coming from a DTD that is 0 all the way up to 10 gig years. Okay, so not 1 gig year. It's 0 all the way up to 10 gig years, and then it is equal to some number. I put it 2 times 10 to the minus 5 here. And I did it such that if you convolve the star formation history with this DTD, you get about 30,000 fake RLRA, which is roughly the number of RLRA we have in the oval survey. Okay, there will be plus minus difference depending on how you randomly draw. Right. And so what I said was that, okay, with this fake RLRA map, which contains only old stars, only old RLRA, let's measure the DTD with our algorithm, with our MCMC, and see if we, by mistake, measure things less than 10 gig years, okay? Which should not happen because we know that this, for a fact, that this mock sample is from a 10 gig year DTD. Right. And what we see is that indeed our DTD is in the blue lines over here, only significantly measured above 10 gig years, okay? So the last 2 bins, they're only significantly measured above 10 gig years. And then below that, we only get upper limits. So the measurements there are not significant. And that is in stark contrast with the dashed line measurement that we have from the actual oval survey. And so that shows that our technique is not necessarily picking up something aberrant. This oval 4 survey, this oval 4 RLRA is distributed such that we are inevitably recovering this very young signal in our DTD. And also as a further confirmation, if you go to figure 6, which probably is the next page.
Okay. Nice.
So in figure 6, what we do is we show this result visually. Okay, so on the left, you have the number of RLRA per square arc minute. Okay, so it's kind of blocky over here, the red plot. And the reason is that we are calculating the surface density of RLRA per cell of this star formation history map of Harrison-Zariski. So they essentially divided their photometry into 12 arc minute or 24, I think, or maybe 25 arc minute cells, and they solved for the star formation history in each and every one of these cells. So we are showing the number density of RLRA in each and every one of these cells.
Okay.
And then we compare that with the predicted surface density of RLRA in the same area as a function of an old DTD, which is what I showed in figure 5, okay, where the DTD is 0 below 10 gigayears and then non-zero above 10 gigayears,
Yes.
versus the bottom plot, which is the Ogle 4 DTD, the actual DTD that we recovered from the Ogle survey in figure 3.
Okay.
And you see that, and then on the right side is the residual of this. So essentially the top right is the left plot minus the middle plot.
Yep.
And then the bottom right is the left plot minus the bottom middle plot.
I'm with you.
Right. And so what you see is that the discrepancy in the number of RLRA with the old DTD, okay, with this assumption that all the RLRA are actually old or ancient, the discrepancy with the observed distribution is actually much higher than with the DTD that we recovered.
Okay.
So in other words, what we're measuring is consistent with the distribution of RLRA you have in the LMC. You know, it's not like we're not measuring something, you know, aberrant. We're measuring something that's real. Okay. Yeah. And essentially you're solving for X. The DTD is not like a theoretical measurement we're doing. It is an empirical measurement given the RLRA sample and given the star formation history measurements. Okay. So we get what we get essentially. Another thing that we checked was that, okay, a lot of these RLRA are in the bar of the LMC where there's a lot of crowding. Ooh. And what if this crowding is causing problems? You know, maybe we're getting, you know, something screwy is happening below 4 or 5 gigayears where, you know, your photometry is kind of affected by stellar crowding and blending and so on. So to check this, I mean, obviously we didn't make the star formation history map, so we can't like redo everything. But what we said was that, okay, let's exclude the bar. All right, let's just exclude all of the cells that contain the bar stellar population and calculate the RLRA DTD on that. Okay. And that didn't solve the problem either. You know, we still have a significant signal. So I'm calling an inner bar and an outer bar. This is based on the Harrison-Zariski definition of the inner and outer bar. Okay. But it roughly just contains the bar region. And so with either of those two, we still have the same delay time distribution measurement. Okay. So it's still kind of weird. Yep. And so the next thing that we did was we looked at the star clusters of LMC. I think only the LMC, yeah. So I think that result is in figure, very likely just the next one.
Okay.
Yeah. So here, what we did was that okay. I mean, you know, it seems like our DTD measurement is okay. You know, we did this mock test where we assume that it's 10 gigayears, and you know, we get back what we put in. We excluded the bar where the photometry is the worst. We still get back the same signal. All right. But then if you look at, okay, so what does the star clusters in the LMC say, you know? And so what we did was that we went through the literature, we looked at all the globular clusters in the LMC, we put the RLRA map on those globular clusters, and we sort of tried to just estimate the number of RLRA per area of the cluster. Okay. Mm-hmm. And what we found is that, you know, as you expect, majority of the 10 to, you know, as old as the universe clusters contain a large number of RLRA, all right? And all of the intermediate age clusters do not, okay? I mean, they probably contain one, maybe two, maybe a few coincident RLRA, but it's not significantly different from the background. Okay, but what we are also okay, so in a parent site, if you look at this result, you will think that, okay, old clusters contain RLRA, young clusters do not, therefore our DTD measurement is wrong or something like that.
Yes.
But but also there's a statistical issue over here. Okay, the number of RLRA in the intermediate age clusters might be small, but then the masses of these clusters is also proportionally smaller. Okay, the globular clusters are usually above 10 to the 5 solar masses, which is what I'm showing in the color bar here on the left-hand plot. Whereas the intermediates are like less than 10 to the 4. So if you in the DTD plot, I showed that you get roughly 1 RLRA per 10 to the 5 solar mass. Okay, so in these intermediate clusters, even if they did produce RLRA, you wouldn't really see any of them, or you wouldn't see a statistically significant number of RLRA in the cluster area compared to the background. So this test is, it doesn't exactly swing it in favor of our DTD interpretation, but it is somewhat inconclusive because of the statistical uncertainty in the number of RLRA in our star cluster measurements. So this is just something that we kind of did as part of our checklist of sanity checks. And so we found that, even though intermediate age clusters don't have enough RLRA, it doesn't exactly disprove what we're finding. Okay, so so that brings us to the discussion of all of these results. Yeah. So we found that RLRA survey is fine. There's nothing that we're missing in, or there's nothing contaminating the RLRA oval survey. Our measurements seem to be solid. I mean, if you look at, if you put a mock DTD with old RLRA, you get back the old RLRA DTD. If you remove the contamination, if you remove the stellar crowded bar region of the LMC, you still get back the old, you get back our old RLRA DTD. Right. And the star clusters are, even though only the older clusters have RLRA, the intermediate clusters are lower in mass, so they wouldn't exactly be able to falsify our hypothesis. So so we ruled out the first two. So the only plausible thing that could be going on here is that there's some issue with our star formation history measurements. Okay. And this is where we kind of had to end the paper, because we don't really do star formation history measurements. And this is something that we will have to investigate in the future. But so first of all, the star formation history measurements in our local group galaxies, first of all, they are an amazing piece of work. I mean, they have led to all this inferences that we have made about the evolutionary history of the Magellanic Clouds or M31, or the chemical evolution of these galaxies and the interaction history of the Magellanic Clouds. And so they're incredibly difficult to make, but they have led to a lot of fantastic science over the last 10, 20 years or so. Right. But on the other hand, these maps are very difficult to make. All right. First of all, stellar evolution, which is the background theme of this paper, is inherently uncertain. Massive stars, there's a lot of uncertainties, as we know, in high mass stars because of mass loss or binary interactions and things like that. But in the last couple of years, we've also seen that older stellar populations can also have uncertainties from stellar evolution models. Okay, as an example, there's a significant fraction of metal poor old stars that could be in binaries. And most of these star formation histories rely on single stellar evolution models. So if you are ignoring those binary interactions, if, let's say, I think there was a paper by Badenis and Maxwell Moe in like the last 3 or 4 years, It showed that there's a significant fraction of metal poor old stars, solar mass stars, that are consistent with being in binaries or multiple systems. And if that's the case, then there's quite a possibility that a non-negligible fraction of old stars will experience binary evolution, and that'll alter their evolution compared to the single stellar case. There's also things like blue stragglers, which are basically mergers of low mass stars that mimic younger stars on a color magnitude diagram.
Yep.
And this is something that has definitely been observed in dwarf galaxies where the crowding is a little less. But could conceivably be a problem in bigger galaxies like the Magellanic Clouds or M31, where there's so many objects on a single diagram. And so those modeling uncertainties could potentially skew the Magellanic Cloud star formation history measurements, which could be why we are seeing this intermediate age signal. Also, star formation histories kind of depend on how or what sort of assumptions you're making about the binning of your ages or the binning of your metallicities or your photometric errors and so on. So for example, there's a paper by Rubel et al. Which looks at the star formation history of the small Magellanic Cloud with newer data by the VISTA survey.
Okay.
And when you compare that with the older star formation histories from the SWOPE survey, you find, or I think it's the Magellanic Cloud photometric survey, you find that the star formation history and the older ages is a bit different between the two surveys.
Okay.
And the reasoning could be a multiplicity of reasons. As I said, star formation history measurements are complicated, but one of the big differences between the surveys is how the binning is done in metallicity. Okay. So that alone could kind of shift your solutions here and there. So there could be a bunch of reasons why our DTD measurement is showing that RLRA are or could come from a younger population. I mean, given orthogonal independent evidence, it is highly unlikely that such a significant fraction of RLRA are young. Okay. But on the other hand, we are getting this. We're not like we have this survey, we have this star formation history, we're getting this DTD. And so the answer could lie in the stellar evolution model uncertainties. It could lie in the assumptions you're making in the star formation history measurements. The Harrison-Zariski catalog was also derived from a slightly shallow photometry, and it used Hubble data on isolated fields to kind of extrapolate it to 10 gigayears. So that could also be kind of affecting our results. But regardless, the message for the community is that we should probably be a little cautious about our star formation history measurements. There are model uncertainties, there are assumption uncertainties, and you don't really rigorously scrutinize the spatial solutions of the SADs. We call it SAD in this paper for star formation history. So SAD stands for stellar age distribution. Mm-hmm. But the DTD actually gives you a way to rigorously test the star formation history measurements. Yeah. And so maybe this is something that we need to keep in mind when we do future surveys. There's photometric surveys by SMASH that's going to, I think that's already out, but is in the process of being rolled out further for the Magellanic Clouds. There's also going to be star formation history surveys by HST, by JWST, very likely by WFIRST. And this is something to keep in mind. This could be an issue that could be affecting star formation history measurements, could skew other results that rely on star formation history measurements. And I think the DTD is a great way to test all of this. We're in an era where we are doing wide field surveys. We're we're not just detecting single objects, we're detecting like hundreds and thousands of objects, within a short span of the survey. And so the DTD is a perfect technique for this population big data regime of astronomy. You can just take these surveys, put them on a star formation history map, calculate the DTD. If your star formation history is reliable, you can learn things about the stars you're studying. And if the stars you're studying are reliable, for example, R. Lyrae, you can use that to learn about the star formation histories. So I think it's a very, very lucrative technique that I'm hoping to develop more with my collaborators.
Cool. Sumit, I want to thank you so much for walking us through your really lovely article. And I think, to use a modern word about it, there's a tension between what the DTT is giving and what you think our libraries are. So it's very cool to hear you talk about some of the future stuff that will be coming, let's say over the next 5 years or so, to help further reduce this tension. And maybe we'll learn something new about star formation, making star formation maps. Maybe we'll learn something new about our library. So it's very cool.
And actually, we also, as part of our 5-year plan, we actually will be applying this to other types of stars as well.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, we'll apply this to like Cepheids, Delta Scuti. We kind of mentioned this in the conclusion, and I think that'll test the DTDs and other age ranges as well. And and then finally, once we pass all these tests, I'm hoping we would have learned a lot about different types of stars, stellar evolution, or maybe star formation history maps.
Or even just the pulsation properties of those stars.
Or yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a different way of studying this. So I'm excited.
Right. No, it's very cool. It's very cool. So there's I'm looking forward to seeing some really exciting results coming out of this over the next, let's say, 5 years. So good. Awesome.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, that'll do it. And I want to thank you so much. And I hope this made your day a little bit brighter, and we will see you on the next one. Thank you. Bye-bye.